with her daughters, and she told me that. And I know
Yeah.
Jean has already been.
She's already been, right.
And I mean, it is exquisite, but well, it will be up to Gail, I guess, to see whether she thinks it's appropriate.
Yeah, I rather doubt it, but we'll see.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, I've looked into the Harvard Art Museum and the museum up in Salem.
Yes, I went with.
And also the Worcester Art Museum, which is also has extremely good. Have you ever been there?
The Worcester Art Museum?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. My husband and I used to go there all the time.
Yeah, it's a wonderful museum.
Right. But you know, it's kind of difficult to think of organizing a trip to any of these museums, because you can get people to sign up, but you can't tell them, would you like to go on a certain date? So you have to find, they have to find out who wants to go, and then you have to call in and find out what date is available and then go back to them. That's the only way to deal with all the museums.
Right.
Well, no,
so it makes it a little more complicated.
Before we close down with the COVID, Marlene and I took a trip with your bus to Salem, and there were two buses. One was completely full, and the other one was only Marlene and I and somebody in this building called Betty. You know her.
Yeah.
And just the three of us, and we went in this rattly bus. It was. But listen, we enjoyed the trip, but except the bus was really bad.
Oh,
and
yeah, I know.
There were only three of us in that one.
So welcome, everybody. It's so good to see you all. I'm Julia. I'm the rabbinic intern working with Rabbi Jim and filling in for him while he's away this week and next. And I'm so excited to be here with all of you and to get to see some new faces of people I haven't met yet. I thought maybe just because I'm new, it would be great if we could all just go around and share your name and then maybe why you came to this program today, briefly, just a sentence or two. We'll start here in the room. So we have. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Harry. I am an MSW intern here. I came to this event one other time with Rabbi Jim. I just came to hear the story.
Great.
My name is Stuart, and I came to this activity to learn how the climate changes in our country.
Great. And I apologize. We're missing our microphone on this end. So if you have trouble hearing anyone here, just let me know and I can repeat. And on Zoom,
I could probably tell you, you'll have to repeat everything.
Okay, we'll do our best, Sandy. Why don't you go next?
Okay, I'm Sandy Greenberg. I've lived here for 5 years, very successfully.
Great. And I can see names, so maybe I'll call on people and you can share it. Rita.
I'm Rita Richmond, and I'm at 1550 Beacon Street. And climate, any topic, any discussion regarding climate is A1 on this date. So I'm happy to participate.
Great. Jean.
I'm Jean Preer at 1550 Beacon Street, and I'm interested in climate issues, and I'm also a participant in the New Yorker group and Soul Search. So this combines all of those.
Sure does. Great. Naomi?
I'm Naomi Isler. I live at 100 Center Street, have done for about 4 years now, and am quite interested and concerned about climate change, and probably have been drafted for the sustainability here. Yes, hello,
Great.
Jim. We'll get together.
Great, Phyllis.
Oh, I'm trying to find you guys.
Oh, and Anne just joined us, actually. Anne, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're doing, we are missing some of our technical equipment, so we're gonna use a small screen and we'll do our best, yeah. But I'm so glad you're here. So we're just going around introducing ourselves and sharing names and then why we came today. And Phyllis is going next.
I'm Phyllis and I live at 1550 and I'm part of the New Yorker group with a reader. And we're interested in the subject of global warming. So that's why I'm here.
Great. Susan.
My name is Susan Flynn. I live at 1550 Beacon Street, and I've been going to these climate change seminars ever since they started, because climate change is a very big concern of mine. And I'm getting more and more concerned the more I hear about it on the news. So I'm very glad to join this group.
So glad you're here. Marlene.
My name is Marlene Michelle. I'm at 1550 Beacon Street. I'm a member of the New Yorker group, and I'm also interested in climate change.
Wonderful. And Anne Prager.
Yes, I'm Ann Prager, and I'm very interested in climate change. I think it's very, very frightening what's happening.
Yeah. And Anne here.
I'm Ann Whitaker. I live at 100 Center Street. And I'm interested because this article is about something that happened in my hometown of Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
Oh,
Glad you could make it. You
I
found
had to
us.
find it.
Glad you found us in time. Great. So I think we'll follow, what I believe is a similar structure to how Rabbi Jim runs this group. So I will share the screen and I'll read through a few paragraphs at a time. We'll pause for people to share what's coming up for them as we go, and then we can have a bigger discussion at the end. So I'll go ahead and share the screen. And this is, as many people alluded to, this is an article that appeared in the New Yorker magazine. It was in their October 18th issue. And hi, welcome. Great. Hi.
Hi, Murray.
I'm right here. We'll share. And I apologize again to everyone who's here in person that it's not on the big screen. So we'll do our best with what we have. So the article is called 72 Hours Under the Heat Dome, a chronicle of a slow motion climate disaster that became one of Oregon's deadliest calamities. And I'll say, I know for me that reading this article was a very emotional experience. So just we can gear up for that. So I'll start reading. Yeah. The high winds that make up the polar jet stream encircle the northern hemisphere like a loosely draped rope. There are typically 4 or 6 curves in the rope, the result of the temperature differences between the equator and the North Pole. The pattern of these curves is usually predictable. The weather associated with them, warm or cold spells, rain or snow, sticking around for a week or two, unless a significant event disrupts it. On June 20th, a tropical depression that appeared in the Western Pacific near Micronesia may have been the beginning of such a disruption. The next day, as the tropical depression moved northwest past Guam, it gathered enough force, sustained winds of 40 miles per hour, to qualify as a tropical storm. It turned north on June 22nd, and as the storm, called Champi, near Japan, it became a typhoon with winds as strong as 92 miles per hour. As the typhoon moved farther north, though it weakened and then disappeared altogether on its way toward Alaska. Typhoon Champy caused no serious damage and no loss of human life. But a number of atmospheric scientists believe that it may be what gave the jet stream a snap. After the storm diminished, its force continued on, crimping the jet stream into a sharply curved band, or what meteorologists refer to as an omega block, because it resembles the Greek letter. This led to what's called colloquially a heat dome, a high pressure system in which hot air is trapped over a single geographic area. It stalled over British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon, sealing in the heat. So I'll pause there. I found it fascinating to read this beginning of the article to understand a bit more about how the science was working, about how weather systems work. I think I never would have put together those pieces before of the typhoon, the tropical storm that became the typhoon that turned into a heat pocket, this dome that settled. Yeah, I was curious if anyone had anything they wanted to add. Jean. Yeah.
I was really struck by the storm beginning in Micronesia, because that island country is one of the places on the planet that's threatened with being overcome by rising water. The representative from Micronesia at the current climate meeting is there to plead the cause of island countries like hers, because they're so endangered by climate change. So I was really interested that this story began, and this storm began in Micronesia.
Yeah, that's a great connection to what's going on in this very moment. Yeah. Great. Anne, here.
Living in Oregon for the last 50 or 60 years before I moved here 2 years ago, the weather in the Pacific Northwest is highly influenced by the Japanese current. It's about the same latitude as Boston. It's north of Chicago. Portland is. And the Japanese current comes up past Japan, maybe from Micronesia, and swoops down the west coast, so that the temperatures in Western Oregon, where the mountains are not that cold in the wintertime. They go down to 40. They can go down to freezing. It even has gone below freezing, but that's every 10 or 20 year thing, And this was very interesting. I still have a son living in Portland, and I've been through heat waves in Portland. Usually they went to 102, 103, 104, and no more than 3 days. This was very different.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Right.
Well, one of the things that when we talk about heat, what's happening, the term climate change is what comes up all often. And do some research, if any, who came up with the term climate change? And the answer is it came up by the oil and gas producers. They wanted to make it very neutral. The climate is changing. Don't look at us. We are not doing anything to heat the climate. And as long as we keep talking about using the term climate change, it sounds like, well, it's just changing. We really should be talking that we say we are heating the globe. And unless we stop using fossil fuel, we're all going to be in trouble.
Thank you for that, Murray. Could people hear Murray enough, or do I need to?
Yes.
Okay.
You could repeat it.
Great. So to quickly summarize, Murray said a lot of articulate things. I'm going to consolidate them just to say that the term climate change he researched, and it was created by the oil and gas industries as a way to sort of distance human responsibility from what's happening. And he was saying a more appropriate way to talk about it would be to say we're heating up the earth. Yeah. I also have heard the term climate chaos, which I feel adds a little bit of terror and hope maybe a useful way of the way this changed, the way that we're changing the world and how unpredictable things are becoming. Yeah, great. We'll keep going. On June 23rd in Portland, inside a labyrinthine government building across the Willamette River from
Willamette.
Willamette. Thank you, Portlanders. I think I'm not the first one to do that with your eye roll. Yeah, there are places where I'm from where everyone always mispronounces them. So I know the feeling. I'll do my best, but please keep chiming in. On June 23rd in Portland, inside a labyrinthine government building across the Willamette River from downtown, Chris Voss, the emergency management director of Multnomah County, joined a teleconference call. He marveled at the number of people on the monitor in front of him. Dozens of administrators from all over the region, including crisis managers from neighboring cities and unincorporated areas, and officials from health, human services, and transportation departments, and from the National Weather Service. The hottest temperatures ever recorded in Oregon were imminent. The heat dome appeared on weather models as a bloody thumbprint pressed into the Pacific Northwest, and would likely produce what one meteorologist characterized as obscene temperatures. 103 degrees, 104, maybe even 107 were forecast. This is not just uncomfortable heat. Jennifer Vines, the lead health officer for 3 counties, including Multnomah, advised Voss and the others. This is life-threatening heat. 21% of households in the metropolitan area do not have air conditioning. Deaths were likely throughout the county, home to more than 800,000 residents, including around 650,000 in Portland. A representative from the National Weather Service told the participants on the call that the nighttime lows could be as high as 80 degrees with no breeze. There would be no reprieve after the sun went down. Emergency officials decided to open 3 cooling shelters and to keep them running around the clock. The largest would be at the Oregon Convention Center, capable of housing hundreds of people. Voss would help lead the teams working at the shelters and sort out the logistics of securing beds, food, water, and other supplies. Vines, the health officer, had studied deadly heat waves. She knew the severity of the physiological stress, how the heart works harder to move blood around so that a person can dissipate heat through the skin, the face going red because the blood vessels are open, trying to radiate that heat, how overnight cooling is needed to give the vascular system a break. She warned her colleagues, people can literally bake in their homes. Anything anyone wants to chime in with this point?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, you want to say, I don't want to, no, you could. One of the problems we face is that this whole business of climate is becoming has become very political. And in some ways, if the
I think I've got something, but actually I have a bunch of people. Yeah, I'm getting a.
Here, keep going, Murray. Yeah.
There are people who really don't want us to do anything, just accept what it is. And what they do is say, scientists talk. I mean, who is scientists? How do they know? And the whole thing is, don't trust science. Don't listen to people in government who are telling us that we have to do something. And their message is, for people around here in the room, we don't have to do anything, just relax. And that's just not the case. Well, many seniors can feel, well, it's not going to affect me, but we have children and grandchildren. And unless we do something now, it's going to be too late.
Yeah. Jean, I saw your hand up. Or no, sorry, Naomi.
Yeah, it seems to me that when we were undertaking some of our less well-considered foreign excursions into Iraq, people were talking about soldiers having to deal with temperatures that reached the 120s during the daytime. Now, was the saving issue there that the temperatures dropped at night? Reggie, come on. Reggie, knock it off. You know, how have people living in this kind of climate over time managed to cope? Or is it that although these temperatures may be constant in the daytime, they do drop considerably enough at night so that people can cool off? You know, this is not the place in the world that has extremely high temperatures, I guess is what I'm asking.
Would you please mute everyone until we get rid of all this background noise?
Yeah, it's Reggie. Are you able?
I see Rita's picture below that, above that. Yeah.
Reggie,
So
will you mute?
leave meeting again. All right, click, click.
Sorry, it's not a matter
What?
of meeting.
Oh, no.
Reggie, I'm gonna put, okay. Great. It wasn't a matter of muting. It was going between mute and unmute back and forth. So there's nothing that I could do about it, but all right. Thank you so Naomi, your question was about whether, can you restate your question?
Yeah. When our people went into Iraq, they were told that they would have to deal with temperatures equivalent to the 120s. And apparently people have been living in Iraq fairly successfully for several thousand years. So I'm wondering how people in areas like that have learned to adjust, or is it the case that these may be daytime temperatures, but that the temperature drops sufficiently at night that people are able to cool off? But apparently there are parts of the world where this kind of temperature is not unusual.
Great. Yeah. Does anyone want to respond to Naomi?
Well,
Yeah.
This isn't really a response, but I was thinking about how about people who live on the equator?
That too.
Yeah.
That too.
Yeah.
they
You know,
pointed,
is it that we're just insufficiently prepared for this kind of thing, and with better preparation, you know, leave the whole global issue of warming out of it. The immediate question is, how do you manage to survive to the next week?
just a couple of facts about the Pacific Northwest. It usually on the coastal areas, we're not talking about the eastern part that's high desert. We're talking about the coastal areas, and generally it cools down at night. And as they pointed out, a lot of people do not have air conditioning.
Yeah.
Of course, we all grew up without it, but still. What was I going to say? It generally cools down at night, and it doesn't stay hot for very long. I've lived there when the temperature did go above 100, but was only for 2-3 days at a time.
Yeah. And I think you're right, Naomi, that there is a difference between places where people have learned how to live with extreme heat. And I don't know that it's always easy for them either, but versus a place that is not used to that. And the question about the temperatures at night, it's a great thing to look into. Yeah. Great. So I'll keep going. By 10 a.m. on Saturday, June 26th, thermometers already read 82 degrees. At 10:14, a barefoot man wearing a t-shirt and blue sweatpants was found lying in the grass. A caller to 911 said that the man was coherent, but in need of help, likely because of the heat. A little more than an hour later, in the Hazelwood neighborhood, a resident found a man unconscious in a doorway. That caller too thought the emergency was heat related. Calls to EMS climbed to double the normal volume. At 1:37 p.m., When the temperature was nearing 96 degrees, a man was found at a bus stop in Mill Park, passed out on the sidewalk. At 2:34, two callers reported seeing a man with a cane stumble and collapse on East Burnside Street, evidently toppled by the heat. Just so you know, this is a picture of Shane Brown, who will meet shortly in the article. Yeah. In Northeast Portland, a 35-year-old Amazon distribution employee named Shane Brown drove to a Walmart where he picked up groceries curbside and headed to the neighborhood of Rockwood, where his
And
67
now I get some pictures on the, oh,
headed to the neighborhood of Rockwood, where his 67-year-old mother, Jolene Brown, lived in an apartment complex. Junked cars lined the street, abandoned automobiles that had been gutted or filled with trash. He stepped out of the car and onto the scorching asphalt of the parking lot. It was before noon and already into the 90s. He pulled out 2 bags of groceries for his mother. In her studio apartment, sunlight passed through a pair of sliding glass doors and crept across the hardwood floors. The entire space comprised a small kitchen, a bathroom, and a room crammed with a television, a bed, and an orthopedic recliner. Shane greeted his mother. Jolene, who had gone by Jolly since childhood, propped her legs up on the recliner's footrest. A tube trailed from her nostrils to an oxygen tank next to the chair. 20 years ago, doctors discovered blood clots in her lungs and diagnosed a pulmonary embolism. She needed supplementary oxygen ever since. Shane set his mother's groceries on the counter, then returned to the car to retrieve a package that Jolly had arranged to have delivered to Shane's apartment, because at 15 pounds, it was too heavy for her to carry. It was a swamp cooler, which runs fans over water to cool the air a few degrees. It stood about 2.5 feet tall and had wheels, enabling Shane to roll it as close as possible to his mother. He sat down on the bed and queued up The Masked Singer on Hulu, which they had watched together every Saturday. Jolly and Shane's father had separated when Shane was 3, and she had raised him alone, moving around the West, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, as she followed work in the telecom industry. In recent years, cirrhosis and her reliance on oxygen tanks often kept her homebound. So Shane picked up her groceries, chauffeured her to medical appointments, and stopped by on his days off every Saturday and Wednesday. By the end of The Masked Singer, the swamp cooler had helped a little, but it left the room muggy and uncomfortable. Back at his apartment, Shane crouched near a small portable air conditioner, which cooled him only if he sat directly in front of him. At 5:04 p.m., the temperature in Portland hit 108 degrees, 4 degrees higher than had been predicted and 1 degree higher than the city's all-time record. After the teleconference call earlier in the week, Chris Voss and other county leaders and their staffs worked around the clock, preparing and maintaining the cooling shelters. Inside the Oregon Convention Center, the staff kept the temperature in the 90,000 square foot space at around 70 degrees. There were food serving stations, a medical station, and cots. In addition to people experiencing homelessness, the guests included those who did not have air conditioning in their homes and students in unair conditioned dorms. One young man arrived unconscious in the back of a car. He was revived by the time an ambulance showed up, but he refused to go with the EMTs because he said he couldn't afford it. Alex Sanchez, a county employee, explained that nonprofits could help him with the bills and that emergency rooms couldn't turn anyone away. He wouldn't budge. At times, the noise inside the convention center was deafening, the din of a village square reverberating throughout. Sometimes a fight broke out and the staff would guide those in the squabble to separate ends of the shelter. When more people arrived, the staff would take down another set of the convention center's modular walls to make more space available. In the course of the heat wave, the cooling shelters hosted 1,400 people overnight. At its peak, the convention center housed 385 in a single night, not to mention dozens of cats and dogs and a few rabbits, a temperature-controlled ark riding out the wave in a city blistering under the deadly reckoning of climate change. Any reflections on this next part?
It almost reminds me of the New Orleans Convention Center during Katrina.
Indeed, yes. Yeah. I'm feeling a lot of gratitude for the city for putting in the effort to make these shelters and wishing somehow that it could have been enough to help everybody. And feeling both the effort to do so much and the ways that it also didn't quite, meet everyone's needs.
No, well, again, there were a couple of things pointed to. The guy who did not want to go to the emergency room because, well, maybe some nonprofits could help him with the bills, but if you don't have insurance, you got problems. And you sort of wonder, all right, this was an emergency shelter, and were a few others. A lot of homeless people don't want to go to shelters because they find that they are not pleasant places and not necessarily safe places. So apparently this had a different reputation.
Yeah, that's a great point, Naomi. I think we're already starting to see some of the systemic issues that are in our society sort of coming up against this environmental crisis, which also is caused by humans. And I think it's also important to remember the larger context too of this all happening during COVID and what it meant for people to make the decision about going to share such a large space with so many people.
And leaving your home unguarded.
Yeah. Murray.
So, two things that come out. You talked about income inequality and how people with the air conditioners can get by and people who don't have the money, they're really in trouble. The other thing to think about is there are many places that have had the electric system went down and there was no electricity. And again, if we just say, it only happens infrequently, we shouldn't do anything, then I think we're in trouble. We really have to take these things very seriously and do something about heating the globe, and also about whole business about income inequality, because we're okay. It's okay. There are a lot of people, not because it's their fault. I mean, my father died when I was 5, and my mother and I and my sister were on public assistance for 7 years. During the Depression, there was nothing we can do. But unless we have programs to help people who don't have the money, we're really all in trouble.
Thank you, Murray. Yeah, I think we'll see. I think, we'll dig more too in this article into some of the tension between the ways that as a whole we can look out for each other versus the individualism that is so prominent in our country, and see ways they work and don't work together. On Sunday, June 27th, Shane Brown took a personal day off from work and joined friends at Rooster Rock State Park along a tranquil stretch of the Columbia River, about 25 miles east of Portland. The heat was awful, yet Shane and his friends stayed from 11 until 5 or 6 p.m., attracted by the relative coolness of the river. The sun turned Shane's shoulder a searing pink. Back at his apartment, he called Jolly, and they decided, with the weather report forecasting another triple-digit day, that he should not go to work the next morning. There was no way he could handle a 10-hour shift at the Amazon warehouse. Jolly told them that she couldn't get the swamp cooler to work properly. She and Shane discussed buying her an actual air conditioning unit soon. Outside, asphalt buckled. cables on the Portland streetcar melted. At 3:23 p.m. in the Piedmont neighborhood, did I say it right? Ann?
Piedmont, yes.
Great. A lifeguard exhibited signs of heat stroke. At 4:33, the temperature hit 112, breaking the previous day's record by 4 degrees. An hour later, in Powellhurst, Gilbert, a 93-year-old woman became confused and feverish. Her skin was hot to the touch. At 7:42, a 31-year-old man at the entrance of a grocery store was vomiting and unable to hold down water. The city's first responders had implemented a divert and zone protocol reserved for mass casualty events. Ambulance crews would take one patient to Oregon Health and Science University, home to the state's largest hospital, and the next patient to Portland's other major trauma facility, Legacy Emmanuel Medical Center. Many exhibited signs of heat illness, nausea, vomiting, difficulty breathing. Some were confused or irritable. Medical staff referred to some of the patients as obtunded, meaning they were unable to respond at all. At the convention center, late in the afternoon, a man collapsed at the entrance. A nurse from the Medical Reserve Corps and Jenny Carver, an emergency manager for the county, rushed to his aid. They placed cooling towels around his neck, helped him to stand up, sat him back down, and gave him water. I'm glad the convention center wasn't 100 yards farther away, someone on the emergency team said. Staffers opened up yet another section of the floor. The number of guests had continued to grow. At a nearby hotel, Voss loaded his car with garbage bags full of ice. The hotel's management had donated the ice to help the cooling shelter's guests make it through the night. As Sunday came to an end, the city braced for its hottest day yet. Vivek Shandas, a professor and researcher at Portland State University, woke up on Monday in the relative cool of his bedroom next to his partner, Kathleen, their 11-year-old son, and the family's 2 dogs. A portable AC unit blew cold air across the bed. About a week earlier, Kathleen, having heard about the coming high temperatures, had bought the unit, their first. The family spent most of the weekend huddled in the bedroom, working, watching movies, playing video games. Shandas measures and studies ambient heat, particularly in urban areas, often to demonstrate disparities between affluent neighborhoods and poor ones, and communities of color. He's written multiple studies on the phenomena known as urban heat islands, pockets with scant tree cover, a preponderance of asphalt, and in many cases, close proximity to freeway and parking lots. The asphalt retains heat and hinders nighttime cooling. The lack of trees means there is little shade to cool the ground. In recent years, Shandas had presented his findings to Portland city planners, warning of the threats that climate change poses to urban environments and advising on the design of future housing developments, distinguishing between heat mitigating features, vegetation, light-colored concrete, and heat intensifiers, barren landscapes, black asphalt. So I'm just curious, reading this far, this part in particular, I'm curious if any of you have noticed this in places that you've lived, in cities perhaps that you've inhabited, where there's a difference maybe in landscape between poorer neighborhoods and wealthier neighborhoods in terms of vegetation or concrete or asphalt around. And if you've ever sort of made any connections around this heat question that this researcher is looking into.
Sure, we have it here.
Great. Here in Boston.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I expect in Revere, Chelsea, Everett, maybe Quincy.
Well, they say at the rate, with the way the climate is changing, the polar ice caps will all melt away and you won't find polar bears anymore.
Yeah, yeah, it's true.
Well, let's be more immediate. The Gulf Stream is closing down.
Say that again, Naomi.
The Gulf Stream is starting to slow down.
And
That's a real problem.
I'll just say that for your information, the east side of Portland is generally flat and spread out. And the west side has a flat area near the river and then is very hilly. There's an ancient mountain range on the west side. So they're different climates,
yeah,
as he explains as he goes on in the article.
right. Yeah, I'll say also, oh, Jean, yes.
We lived in Washington, D.C. for many, many years. And the poorer neighborhoods were certainly characterized by asphalt and a lack of trees.
Yeah.
And Chevy Chase, the suburb on the northwest, this may be apocryphal, but my understanding was that every tree in Chevy Chase was in a database. And if you wanted to cut it down, you had to get permission from some town authority. So that town was affluent, well-organized, educated, and we're protecting its trees.
That's true in Portland also.
Also in Portland and yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you have that here too. You need Boston's permission to cut down a tree. And frequently Boston will post notices that, hey, we're going to cut this tree down because it's sick and old. So yeah, there are controls. There are also controls over planting because they have discovered in areas that if you plant a 1-inch sapling, some kid is going to come along and cut it down. Whereas if you plant a 2-inch sapling, you won't be able to do it.
Yeah, I know that I live in Brighton and I always feel the difference walking around my neighborhood in Brighton compared to Cambridge, which I feel like is covered in trees. And we did have some trees, but there was a storm a few years ago. And I think
Yep.
a branch from a tree came down. So they cut down all the trees on the block and then filled the squares where the trees had been with asphalt. So now there are no trees at all. Yeah. Oh, and here, Ann Whitaker.
In Portland, they did landscaping along the Willamette River after building an esplanade, and they planted trees that were 2-3 inches thick. The beavers came and chewed them down and took them away.
Oh, no. Made the beavers happy, I guess. Oh, dear. Okay, Murray, and then we'll keep going.
Yeah, I forgot the guy's name who created Central Park in New York.
Olmsted.
Olmsted.
Brookline guy.
Did a marvelous job in Boston, creating the emerald
Necklace.
necklace.
Yeah.
And I remember walking or driving around wherever you went in Boston, there were trees. And it really was not only beautiful, but I know in terms of our health, because the trees absorb carbon dioxide and they put out cleaner air. So we really need trees to help us continue.
Yeah. Ann Whitaker.
Portland's park system was also designed by Olmsted, and Portland has an extraordinary number of trees. They're very big on street trees, and so it's not a desert by any means.
Right. Great. Okay. We'll keep going. Okay. Here we go. Now Shonda saw a research opportunity. He pulled his son, Suhail, away from Minecraft to help him with a little experiment. In response to the boys' protest, Shonda told him it's not going to happen again. Hopefully, but it may actually happen again in the future. This is our one chance to go out and collect some really interesting data. At around 2 p.m, father and son climbed into the family's Toyota Prius, bringing with them an infrared camera and a handheld temperature sensor, and set off for the neighborhoods that Shonda had identified in 2014 as the city's hottest. Their first stop was a former industrial district in southeast Portland, where turn-of-the-century brick warehouses had been converted into storefronts and multifamily housing. Shonda stuck the sensor out the car window, 119 degrees. Using the infrared camera, he measured the surface temperature of the asphalt. 135 degrees. They headed east first along Hawthorne Boulevard. Every 10 or 15 blocks or so, Shonda took a temperature reading. It was Monday afternoon, nearing rush hour, but there were few cars on the road. Occasionally, they'd pass a homeless encampment and see people stirring inside their tents. Otherwise, they saw almost no human activity. There were no birds either. An avid birder, Shonda noted that even Portland's ever-present crows had retracted from the heat. They drove to Lentz, one of the city's poorest communities. Near the intersection of Southeast 92nd Avenue and Foster Road, Shonda lowered his window. The air felt like a hot iron on his skin. At 3:03 p.m., he took the highest measurement he'd seen in 15 years of chronicling temperature. Not just in Portland, but anywhere. The ambient temperature was 124 degrees. The infrared camera registered the surface of the asphalt at 180 degrees. He braved a few blocks on foot and observed that the neighborhood had many of the elements he'd warned city leaders about for years. Sparse vegetation, asphalt parking lots, residential high-rises crowded together and near an interstate, all absorbing and retaining heat. He made his way northwest. In Nob Hill, one of Portland's wealthiest neighborhoods, he recorded an ambient temperature of 111, 13 degrees cooler than in Lentz. In leafy Willamette Heights, Shonda's sensor logged just 99 degrees. After driving in a near circle around the city for 3 hours, Shonda and Suhail headed home, where a bedroom cooled by the brand new AC unit awaited. Shonda's thought about people without air conditioning in trailer parks, in exposed single-family homes, and in multifamily developments, and he wondered how they were going to survive. Any reactions to this last bit? Yeah, Reggie. Yeah.
Oh, the New York Times account last week of we had severe rainstorms during last week, and the result was that 500,000 people lost power, and apparently there are hundreds left by today. It's still being cleaned up. But what really terrified me was the statement in the Times story about this event, saying that had this particular same storm occurred in winter time, it would have taken weeks to recover from it, to get all the electricity back up, etc. I'm wondering several things. I wonder if a heat wave settled on Boston in this summertime, would we have a hard time recovering? Apparently, I live in 1550. Incidentally, I can hear everybody, but for some reason, after half an hour of trying to get into the meeting, I'm able to hear. So I don't care about the fact I can't see anyone.
Well, we're glad you're here.
We can see you.
Pardon?
We can see you. But I'm glad that you can hear us.
I'm in the community area of 1550, so I better have the mask on.
Yes.
I was violating a rule, but when I asked Gail about the generator for this building, apparently if we had a big blizzard or something that locked down electricity, only the community areas would have electricity. So we wouldn't have the air conditioners in our rooms would not work. I'm wondering if anybody can apply what it would be like in CCB, whether we're in 100, 112, or 1550, if a heat dome settled on us. And I've talked enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reggie. I think you're asking some really good questions and raising some important issues. Yep. Naomi.
How many of you lived here in the winter of 1978? Okay.
I hear a
We
sneaking
had a
island.
storm that shut down the
That was
area.
the last big blizzard, yes.
Yeah, well, somehow people managed. There was flooding. There was massive loss of power. A lot went wrong, especially with supply chains. I mean, you could go to a grocery store and buy a quart of milk if you had an infant in your arms. Things were very bad for about 3 weeks, if I remember correctly. We had the army out.
Were you living in Brighton then?
Yes, I was. And as far as summer goes, we had many days last summer and the summer before when temperatures went into the high 90s and did not go down significantly at night. We haven't had temperatures over 100 for quite a while. I don't know what CCB's provisions are in terms of generators. I do remember one blackout that took 100 Center with it. It was a neighborhood-wide thing, but they restored things in a few hours. But yeah, we're vulnerable. We all are.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And you know, people can go around warning governmental authorities and bureaucrats about something, but it takes something like this Oregon thing to penetrate the consciousness of enough people that maybe they're doing something about it.
Well, with regard to penetrating the consciousness of enough people, obviously that brings up the what is not taking place over the next 2 weeks in Glasgow. And I'll just quote my favorite 95-year-old pundit, not a resident of CCB. The Queen commented recently about such gatherings and politicians generally, quote, they talk, they don't act.
Yep.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that, Reggie. I know Ann Whitaker has her hand up. We'll go here next.
I'd just like to remind us that it's been a few years, but they had some kind of heat wave with power outages in Europe. And
Yes,
many people
right.
lost their power in
Yes.
their vacation
Yes.
season. Just,
Yeah.
you know,
Right. I forgot that.
many people died who were predominantly older and single, living by themselves.
Yeah.
Great, Murray. And then I want to get to the end of the article before we wrap up. Yeah.
And how many times have we hear about a storm that comes, well, 100, it's like a 100-year storm we've never had. Then a week later, or a month later, there's another 100-week storm. And then another, you know, like these are things that are just happening haphazardly. And that's really not the case. It's all part of the business of heating the globe. And somehow or other, I mean, one of the things that I do, I write a lot of songs, and I created a video and a song about climate change. And if anybody ever wanted to hear some of the songs, just go to soundcloud.com and in the search box, type my name, Murray, M-U-R-R-A-Y-K-I-O-K. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Murray. Ann.
In the Pacific Northwest, they redid the flood zone maps recently so that because they kept having these 100-year events year after year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to read through the rest of the article and hopefully we'll still have a few more minutes to keep talking about the issues that are being raised. Okay. So that day, Shane Brown texted his mother at around 7 a.m. and sent her a picture of his sunburned shoulders. By 10 a.m., she hadn't replied, so he tried calling twice on his cell phone and then through Facebook Messenger. No answer. During the 8-minute drive to her apartment, he called 18 more times. When he opened the apartment door, Dolly was sitting in her recliner. She looked asleep, her head lolled to one side, but she also appeared to be in the middle of getting out of the chair with the motorized lift stopped halfway in the up position and one of her feet raised a few inches off the floor. She had removed the oxygen tubes. They rested on her cheek. He touched her to try to wake her up. She felt stiff and wasn't breathing. Jolene Brown was one of 11 people confirmed to have died from the heat that Monday in Portland, including a 78-year-old retired mathematics professor and an 83-year-old former airline mechanic. One woman died in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. Late in the night, a 57-year-old woman went downstairs to the bathroom and was discovered by her spouse early Tuesday morning, unresponsive near the foot of the steps. Many victims were not found for days. Downtown, someone called 911 to report a strong smell coming from the apartment of a man who was not answering his door. In Richmond, neighbors watched medics carry a 73-year-old man out of an apartment complex in a body bag 48 hours after the extreme weather passed. At a mobile home community, a body wasn't discovered until more than a week after the heat wave. By the time temperatures cooled, at least 96 people would be confirmed by the state medical examiner to have died of heat-related causes, making this one of the deadliest natural disasters in Oregon's history. In neighboring Washington, officials reported 95 dead. An analysis of CDC data by the Times suggests that the real number of fatalities in the Pacific Northwest may be 3 times those of official counts. For the majority of those who died, the heat was experienced privately for hours upon hours and then for days. And when temperatures took their final toll, the victims dehydrated and in a hyperthermic state, that was private too. This was a climate catastrophe unlike any the public is used to seeing play out on TV. We've grown accustomed to the dramatic images of human-caused climate change via increasingly frequent hurricanes and wildfires. But the element at the center of it all, the heat, has been more abstract, not as directly connected to Americans' lives. The evidence indicates that that's likely to change. In early July, an international team, part of the World Weather Attribution Group, concluded that the intensity of the heat wave would have been virtually impossible without human-caused climate change. The scientists, including researchers at Princeton, Cornell, Columbia, Oxford, and the Sorbonne, argued in their report that our rapidly warming climate is bringing us into uncharted territory that has significant consequences. In their analysis, which has not yet been peer-reviewed, the researchers posited that temperatures within the heat dome were 3.6 degrees hotter than they would have been at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Furthermore, they concluded that the heat wave was most likely a once-in-a-millennium event, and that in 30 years, with rising temperatures, similar heat waves could be a once-in-a-decade event, or even once every 5 years. What happened this June was startling, Oregon state climatologist Larry O'Neill told me. We're setting more records all the time and seeing things that we usually don't see in places we don't see them. I'm going to skip a little bit just because, I want to, let's just read these last few paragraphs. In August, Multnomah County released a report assessing its handling of the disaster. Nowhere else in the state had seen as many heat-related deaths, 62 people by the latest official account. The county admitted that its call line, 211 Info, a source of critical information for people looking for cooling shelters and other emergency services, inadvertently dropped more than 750 calls, and that when callers got through, they were sometimes given inaccurate information. The county vowed to improve that system and to make sure that cooling shelters were more equitably situated, closer to the homes of the Portlanders who needed them most, and to make transportation to the shelters easier to obtain. 10 days after the end of the heat wave, when temperatures were in the 60s and 70s, I sat with Chris Voss in an empty conference room in the county headquarters. He described the days and nights in the convention center, the ice runs, and the momentary elation of finding new ways to feed hundreds of people under the same roof. When I asked about the more than 60 county residents who had died in the heat, he grew emotional and his glasses steamed up. That number is not palatable for us, he said. It's not palatable for anyone. Well, I'll stop there. I'm curious, yeah, does anyone have any thoughts about the county's response, the learning that they were doing about what worked, what didn't work? Anything else that you're taking away from reading the story and thinking
Yeah.
about?
When you've got that many dropped calls and that much misinformation, you've got problems. You have got real problems. I don't know about the location of the shelters relative to the neighborhoods that might have needed it. That's, Anne would be much more familiar with that than I. But, I mean, it indicates that the response, while it was heroic, really failed in a couple of significant ways. I mean, it saved an incredible number of people, I'm sure. But there were holes in the system that one would hope got patched up quickly, and that the city council didn't decide, oh, well, we're not going to have another one of these for 100 years, so let's not spend the money.
Just to locate things, the convention center is on the east side of the Willamette River, very close to it. And the numbering systems on the streets start about where the convention center is. And Lentz is at 92nd Avenue. So it's 92 blocks east of it. And the blocks in Portland are not huge blocks. Downtown, they're only 200 meters square. So they're not gigantic.
But still a bit of a
it's a long
trek,
way,
yeah.
yeah. But there was transportation too, if people could access it.
Yeah.
And what are the other thing? Oh,
Do you want to share anything, Anna, too, about your son's experience being in Portland
Well,
during this time?
I didn't talk to him that much about it. He got through it okay.
Yeah.
And I've never been through one of those that was that high, but I've been through heat waves there.
Yeah.
And I didn't have air conditioning for some of that time. And I did for later times. But, when we bought a car in 1964, we didn't buy it with air conditioning because people in Oregon didn't need air conditioning in their car. When we drove to the East Coast in 1968 and went through Dallas, we were the only car in the city that had our windows rolled down. We couldn't understand why. Then we realized they're all staring at us because we didn't have any air conditioning. But Portland city government tries hard. They have problems, but every city does. So
Great. So we'll do Jean and then Murray and then Naomi.
I've been reading a book called They Knew.
Mm.
And the subtitle is The US federal government's 50-year role in causing the climate crisis. And it documents how government scientists since the 1970s documented the changing climate and predicted heat waves, storms, all the kinds of things that we're seeing now. And it's really quite telling that we ignored what we were being told and we didn't make the investments back then that would have meant a difference in this kind of situation. And the thing that really shocked me was that when Ronald Reagan became president, he took the solar panels on the roof of the White.
Yeah,
Wow.
that Carter had installed, yeah.
Great. Murray and then Naomi.
I just want to remind everybody that there's an election coming up in Boston. And there are two candidates that are running. One of them is really talking about climate change and what we need to do. So when you're thinking about who you're going to vote for, look at some of those issues Maybe that'll help you decide who to vote for.
Thank you,
I don't
Murray.
think anybody on
Who is that
Murray,
candidate?
Murray, we don't vote in Boston. This is fine. It's a whole different place.
Who is
But
that candidate?
underlying questions that I think we should be asking, we are so dependent on the electric grid, which currently is pretty fragmented nationwide and doesn't quite fit together. And we've had on the East Coast, at least, a couple of massive blackouts caused by this. So who is looking at this gigantic infrastructure called the electric grid to make sure that, that a cooling center can continue to stay cool, or that everybody buying an air conditioner will be able to have it running?
Right.
Is
And-
anybody looking at this global, nationally?
Right. I think I'm really glad that we were able to take this time together to really delve into the heat wave, the dome that hit Portland. And I feel very just moved to hear more of the stories of some of the people who were there on the ground and suffering through it. And I think we are left still with a lot of unanswered questions. And that's part of what happens in these conversations, is we see more of the problems and are thinking about ways to take action. And I hope that we all carry a bit more motivation towards action, towards care for others, and for how we're using electricity and how we're using our energy in the world. And with that, we've reached our time, and I want to just say thank you all so much for coming and joining today. I really appreciate all of you being
you.
here. I look forward to seeing you all sometime soon. Yeah, hopefully in person.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Six guys showed up